Waitress feeds a black homeless person and later gets shocked to find out who he really is. Sarah Thompson wiped down the counter of Joe's Diner for what felt like the 1,000th time that day. The small bell above the door chimed, signaling another customer, and she plastered on her best smile despite the exhaustion settling deep in her bones. At 28, Sarah had been working as a waitress for nearly a decade. It wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself growing up in the small town of Millbrook, but circumstances had a way of derailing even the best-laid plans. Her dreams of becoming a nurse had been put on indefinite hold when her mother fell ill 5 years ago. Between medical bills and the need to care for her younger sister, Emily, Sarah had no choice but to set aside her own aspirations. Joe's Diner had been her saving grace. The owner, a gruff but kind-hearted man named Joe Hansen, had given her a job when she desperately needed one. Over the years, the diner had become a second home to Sarah. She knew every regular customer by name, could recite the entire menu backwards, and had perfected the art of balancing 5 plates on one arm. Despite the long hours and often thankless work, Sarah maintained a warmth and generosity that endeared her to customers and coworkers alike. She was known for her acts of kindness, slipping extra fries to struggling families, offering a sympathetic ear to lonely elderly patrons, and even occasionally covering the bill for those who came up short. As she approached the new customer, Sarah's eyes were drawn to the window. Outside, huddled against the building across the street, was a figure she had begun to recognize over the past few weeks. A homeless man, his dark skin weathered by the elements, sat with his head bowed. Sarah's heart clenched at the sight. She had tried to offer him food before, but he had always politely declined with a shake of his head. Turning back to her customer, Sarah couldn't shake the image of the man from her mind. Little did she know that this ordinary day at Joe's Diner was about to take an extraordinary turn. One that would challenge her perceptions, test her compassion, and ultimately change the course of her life forever. As the lunch rush began to pick up, Sarah moved efficiently between tables, her mind occasionally drifting to the man across the street. She couldn't have imagined that her simple act of kindness towards a stranger would soon lead to a revelation that would shake the foundations of her small-town world and force her to confront truths about herself and her community that she had never before considered. The day had been particularly grueling, with a steady stream of customers keeping Sarah on her feet for hours without a break. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the diner's worn linoleum floor, she finally found a moment to catch her breath. Glancing out the window, Sarah saw the homeless man still sitting in his usual spot, his shoulders hunched against the cooling evening air. Something in her chest tightened. She had seen him there day after day, and each time the urge to help had grown stronger. Today, she decided, would be different. Today, she would not take no for an answer. With determined steps, Sarah made her way to the kitchen. "Hey, Mike," she called to the cook, "can you whip up a burger and fries, and maybe throw in a slice of that apple pie?" Mike raised an eyebrow. "Sure thing, Sarah. But isn't your shift almost over?" "It's not for me," she replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "Just trust me, okay?" As Mike prepared the meal, Sarah's mind raced. She had always been taught to be careful around strangers, especially in a small town like Millbrook, where everyone knew everyone else's business. But something about this man's quiet dignity, the way he never begged or bothered anyone, had struck a chord with her. The smell of freshly cooked food filled the air as Mike handed over the carefully packaged meal. Sarah thanked him, grabbed her coat, and headed out into the crisp evening air. Crossing the street, Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. As she approached the man, she could see him tense slightly, his eyes darting up to meet hers with a mixture of wariness and resignation. "Hi there," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice gentle and non-threatening. "I hope you don't mind, but I brought you some dinner." The man looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes seeming to search her face for any sign of mockery or deceit. Finding none, he spoke, his voice low and gravely from disuse. "Why?" The simple question caught Sarah off guard. She had expected polite refusal or grudging acceptance, not this direct inquiry into her motives. "Because," she began, then paused, considering her words carefully. Because everyone deserves a hot meal and a little kindness. A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, or a ghost of a smile, crossed the man's weathered features. After what felt like an eternity, he slowly reached out and accepted the package. "Thank you," he said softly, the words carrying a weight that seemed to encompass more than just gratitude for the food. Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "You're welcome. I'm Sarah, by the way." The man nodded, then after a moment's hesitation replied, "James." As James began to eat, Sarah found herself reluctant to leave. There was something about him, a quiet dignity that belied his circumstances. Against her better judgment, she sat down on the cold pavement beside him. "Do you mind if I join you for a bit?" she asked. James looked at her, surprise evident in his eyes, but he nodded his assent. As they sat in companionable silence, broken only by the occasional sound of passing cars and the rustle of the food wrapper, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. Here she was, sitting on a dirty sidewalk with a homeless stranger, and yet she felt more at ease than she had in years. When James finished eating, he turned to her with an expression that Sarah couldn't quite decipher. "You're very kind, Sarah," he said, his voice carrying a hint of sadness. But kindness can be dangerous in a world that doesn't understand it. Before Sarah could respond, James stood up, gathering his few possessions. "Thank you for the meal," he said, "and for sitting with me. It's been a long time since anyone has done that." As he turned to leave, Sarah felt a sudden panic rise in her chest. "Wait," she called out. "Will you be here tomorrow?" James paused, looking back at her with an unreadable expression. "Perhaps," he said softly, then disappeared into the gathering darkness. As Sarah watched him go, she couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter had set something in motion, something that would change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The next few days passed in a blur for Sarah. She found herself constantly scanning the street outside the diner, hoping to catch a glimpse of James. But he remained frustratingly absent, leaving Sarah to wonder if their encounter had been nothing more than a fleeting moment of connection. It was on the fourth day after their meeting that everything changed. Sarah was in the middle of her shift when she noticed a commotion outside. A crowd had gathered across the street, their voices raised in a mix of surprise and curiosity. Her heart racing, Sarah rushed out of the diner, ignoring Joe's confused calls behind her. As she pushed her way through the crowd, Sarah's eyes widened in shock. There, in the center of the commotion, stood James, but he was almost unrecognizable. Gone were the tattered clothes and unkempt appearance. In their place stood a man in a crisp suit, his face clean-shaven and his eyes sharp and alert. "James?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, but somehow he heard her. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying a new authority that hadn't been there before. "I owe you an explanation." As the crowd murmured around them, James began to speak. He wasn't just a homeless man, he revealed. He was Dr. James Carter, a renowned sociologist from the State University. For the past month, he had been conducting an immersive study on homelessness and social perceptions in small-town America. Sarah felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "But why?" she managed to ask, her mind struggling to reconcile the James she had met with the man standing before her now. "To understand," James replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "To see firsthand how people treat those they perceive as less fortunate. To experience the invisibility that comes with being homeless." As James continued to explain his study, Sarah's emotions warred within her. Part of her felt betrayed, as if the connection they had shared had been built on a lie. But another part of her understood the importance of what James had been trying to do. "Out of everyone in this town," James said, his voice softening, "you were the only one who showed true kindness without expecting anything in return. You saw me as a person, not just a problem to be ignored or solved." The revelation sent ripples through the crowd. Some people looked ashamed, others defensive. Sarah could hear whispers, some accusing James of deception, others praising the boldness of his research. For Sarah, however, the world had narrowed to just her and James. She thought back to their conversation, to the sadness in his eyes when he spoke of kindness being dangerous. Now she understood. He had seen the worst of humanity during his experiment, had experienced firsthand the casual cruelty and indifference that the homeless faced every day. As the initial shock began to wear off, Sarah felt a new emotion rising within her: determination. James's experiment had exposed a harsh truth about their community, about the way people chose to see or not see those in need. And in that moment, Sarah knew that she couldn't go back to the way things were before. This revelation wasn't just about James's true identity. It was a call to action, a challenge to do better, to be better. Little did Sarah know that this discovery was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her town, her neighbors, and herself. In the days following James's revelation, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. The comfortable routine of her life at Joe's Diner suddenly felt confining, almost suffocating. James's experiment had opened her eyes to a world of injustice and indifference that she could no longer ignore. After much soul-searching, Sarah made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She would use her position at the diner, her connections in the community, to make a difference. It wasn't enough to simply be kind, she needed to inspire change. With trembling hands, Sarah approached Joe one quiet afternoon. "I want to start a program," she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "A pay-it-forward system for meals. And maybe we could use the diner as a hub for resources for the homeless in our community." Joe's bushy eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Sarah, honey, I know your heart's in the right place, but we're barely keeping afloat as it is. We can't afford to give away free meals." But Sarah was prepared for this. She laid out her plan: how they could partner with local businesses for donations, how they could encourage customers to contribute to the program. "It's not just about feeding people, Joe," she argued passionately. "It's about changing the way our town thinks about those less fortunate." After what felt like hours of debate, Joe finally agreed to give her idea a trial run. Sarah left work that day feeling a mixture of elation and terror. She had taken the first step, but the real challenge lay ahead. The consequences of Sarah's decision rippled through Millbrook like a stone thrown into a still pond. At first, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Regular customers embraced the pay-it-forward program, often adding extra to cover meals for those who couldn't afford them. Sarah worked tirelessly, coordinating with local shelters and outreach programs to spread the word about the resources available at Joe's Diner. But as the weeks passed, the initial enthusiasm began to wane. Some customers complained about the increased presence of homeless individuals in the diner. Others accused Sarah of enabling laziness and dependence. The tension in the small town grew, with battle lines being drawn between those who supported Sarah's initiative and those who opposed it. Sarah found herself the target of both praise and criticism. Some hailed her as a local hero, while others whispered that she was naive at best, and at worst, destroying the character of their town. The stress began to take its toll. Sarah's normally cheerful demeanor became strained, and she found herself lying awake at night, questioning her decisions. The situation came to a head one rainy evening. A group of local business owners had organized a town meeting to discuss the homeless problem that they claimed Sarah's program had exacerbated. As Sarah sat in the back of the crowded community center, listening to people she had known her whole life speak about the homeless with fear and disgust, she felt a deep sense of despair settling over her. Just as she was about to stand up and defend her actions, a familiar voice cut through the din. "If I may speak," James said, rising from his seat near the front of the room. A hush fell over the crowd as James made his way to the podium. With eloquence born from years of academic experience, he began to speak about his experiment, about the realities of homelessness, and about the transformative power of compassion. "What Sarah Thompson has done," he concluded, his eyes finding hers in the crowd, "is not create a problem, but rather expose one that has long existed in this community. She has chosen to see those who are often invisible, to extend a hand where others have turned away. And in doing so, she has challenged all of us to be better, to do better." As James's words sank in, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that the consequences of her decision weren't just about feeding the hungry or providing resources. They were about challenging the status quo, about forcing her community to confront uncomfortable truths. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's resolve was tested time and time again. She faced setbacks and disappointments, moments where giving up seemed like the easiest option. But each time she served a meal to someone in need, each time she saw a spark of hope in the eyes of those who had long been overlooked, she knew she had made the right choice. The consequences of Sarah's decision extended far beyond the walls of Joe's Diner. Her actions had set in motion a change in Millbrook, slow and often painful, but undeniable. As she navigated the choppy waters of community opinion and personal doubt, Sarah began to understand that true change was never easy, but it was always worth fighting for. Little did she know that her journey was far from over, and that the greatest challenges and rewards were yet to come. As Sarah's initiative at Joe's Diner continued to create waves in Millbrook, a secondary plot began to unfold, intertwining with her main story in unexpected ways. Emily, Sarah's younger sister, had been watching her siblings crusade with a mixture of admiration and concern. At 22, Emily was a senior at the local community college, studying social work. She had always looked up to Sarah, seeing her as a pillar of strength and kindness. But now, as she witnessed the toll that Sarah's new mission was taking on her, Emily felt compelled to step in and help. One evening, as Sarah slumped exhausted at their small kitchen table, Emily broached the subject. "Sis, I've been thinking," she began hesitantly. "What if we could expand what you're doing at the diner? Make it more official?" Sarah looked up, curiosity piqued despite her fatigue. "What do you mean?" Emily's eyes lit up as she explained her idea. She wanted to turn Sarah's informal program into a proper nonprofit organization. With Emily's background in social work and Sarah's connections in the community, they could create a structured support system for the homeless in Millbrook and the surrounding areas. As Emily laid out her plans, grant applications, partnerships with other organizations, educational programs, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. This could be the next step, a way to create lasting change beyond the walls of Joe's Diner. However, as the sisters began to work on this new project, they encountered an unexpected obstacle. Their mother, Linda, who had been quietly supportive of Sarah's efforts at the diner, suddenly became resistant to the idea of her daughters dedicating themselves to this cause. "I just don't want to see you girls throw away your futures," Linda said during a tense family dinner. "Sarah, you've already put your dreams on hold for so long, and Emily, you're just starting out. This crusade of yours, it's admirable, but is it really practical?" The sisters exchanged glances, surprised by their mother's reaction. They had always known her to be compassionate and supportive of their endeavors. This resistance was unexpected and hurtful. As the days passed, the tension in the Thompson household grew. Sarah and Emily pressed forward with their plans, spending late nights researching nonprofit laws and drafting mission statements. Linda watched with growing concern, her disapproval manifesting in subtle ways: pointed sighs, worried glances, and stilted conversations. The situation came to a head when Emily announced that she was considering taking a gap year after graduation to focus on getting the nonprofit off the ground. Linda's reaction was immediate and fierce. "Absolutely not," she exclaimed. "I didn't scrimp and save for your education just so you could throw it all away on some pipe dream." The argument that followed was heated, with years of unspoken frustrations bubbling to the surface. Sarah found herself caught in the middle, torn between her sister's passion and her mother's fears. It wasn't until James intervened that the family began to understand the root of Linda's resistance. During a chance encounter at the grocery store, James struck up a conversation with Linda, gently probing into her concerns. "I used to be like your girls," Linda admitted quietly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, "full of dreams to change the world. But life has a way of beating that out of you. I don't want them to face the disappointment I did." James listened patiently, offering a perspective that Linda hadn't considered. He spoke of the importance of pursuing one's passions, of the impact that dedicated individuals could have on their communities. Slowly, Linda began to see her daughter's efforts in a new light. The conversation with James marked a turning point in the secondary plot. Linda's resistance softened, replaced by a cautious support. She began to offer her own insights, drawing from her years of experience navigating the complexities of small-town life. As Sarah and Emily's nonprofit idea began to take shape, it became clear that this secondary plot was not just about family dynamics. It represented a broader theme of generational change, of young idealism meeting real-world challenges, and of the power of open dialogue to bridge divides. The Sisters Project, born from Sarah's initial act of kindness, was evolving into something bigger than any of them had anticipated. It was becoming a catalyst for change, not just in their community, but within their own family as well. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah found her relationship with James evolving in unexpected ways. What had begun as a chance encounter between a waitress and a homeless man had transformed into a partnership built on mutual respect and shared goals. James, now a regular presence in Millbrook, had become an invaluable ally in Sarah and Emily's efforts to establish their nonprofit. His academic background and experience with social research provided a solid foundation for their initiatives, while Sarah's practical knowledge of the community and its needs kept their plans grounded in reality. Their working relationship quickly deepened into a friendship. Sarah found herself looking forward to their meetings, not just for the progress they made on their projects, but for the stimulating conversations that often followed. James challenged her to think critically about social issues, introducing her to new perspectives and ideas she had never encountered in her small-town life. For James, Sarah represented something he had long thought lost in his years of academia. A genuine, unaffected compassion that didn't come from textbooks or theories, but from a deep-seated desire to help others. He admired her tenacity, her ability to persevere in the face of community resistance and personal doubts. As they worked closely together, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in herself. She found herself standing taller, speaking more confidently in community meetings. James's influence had awakened an intellectual curiosity in her that had long been dormant, buried under the demands of her daily life. One evening, as they sat in Joe's diner after hours, poring over grant applications, Sarah looked up to find James watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. James smiled softly. "I was just thinking about how far you've come since we first met. You've grown so much, Sarah." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, James. You've opened my eyes to so much." There was a moment of charged silence between them, filled with unspoken emotions and possibilities. But before either could address it, the diner's door chimed, breaking the spell. As their relationship deepened, so did the complications surrounding it. Whispers began to circulate in the town about the nature of their partnership. Some saw it as a mentorship. Others speculated about romantic involvement. The age difference between them became a topic of gossip, with some questioning James's motives. Sarah found herself having to navigate these rumors, while also grappling with her own confused feelings. James was unlike anyone she had ever known, intelligent, compassionate, and dedicated to making a difference. But he was also older, from a different world, and their relationship had begun under such unusual circumstances. For his part, James was acutely aware of the delicate balance they were maintaining. He valued Sarah's friendship and admired her immensely, but he also recognized the potential ethical implications of any deeper involvement. He had come to Millbrook as a researcher, and despite the unexpected turn of events, he felt a responsibility to maintain professional boundaries. Their evolving relationship also had ripple effects on those around them. Emily, while supportive of their friendship, couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy at the bond Sarah and James shared. Linda, still adjusting to her daughter's new path in life, watched the developing relationship with a mixture of concern and curiosity. As the nonprofit began to take shape, Sarah and James found themselves at a crossroads. The intensity of their work together, the late-night planning sessions, the shared victories and setbacks, had created a connection between them that was becoming harder to define or ignore. One rainy evening, as they walked back from a community meeting, James suddenly stopped under the shelter of a store awning. "Sarah," he said, his voice serious, "I think we need to talk about this." He gestured between them, encompassing the unspoken tension that had been building. Sarah felt her heart race. This conversation had the potential to change everything. Their friendship, their work, the delicate balance they had struck in the community. As she looked into James's eyes, searching for the right words, she realized that their relationship, whatever it was becoming, would play a crucial role in shaping not just their personal lives, but the future of their entire initiative. Little did they know that this conversation would set in motion a series of events that would test their bond, challenge their convictions, and ultimately redefine the course of their lives and their mission in Millbrook. The annual Millbrook Founders Day celebration was in full swing, the town square bustling with activity. Colorful banners hung from lampposts, the air filled with the scent of barbecue and the sound of laughter. For Sarah and James, it represented the perfect opportunity to showcase their nonprofit's progress and garner more community support. They had set up a booth, decorated with photos of their outreach efforts and testimonials from those they had helped. Sarah stood proudly behind the table, engaging passers-by with her warm smile and passionate explanations of their work. James moved through the crowd, clipboard in hand, collecting signatures for a petition to increase funding for homeless services in the county. As the day wore on, their booth attracted more and more attention. Some visitors were supportive, leaving encouraging notes and small donations. Others were skeptical, challenging Sarah and James with pointed questions about the impact of their work on the town's image and resources. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface of Millbrook's polite exterior was beginning to bubble up. Sarah could feel it in the air, a crackling energy that set her nerves on edge. It was late afternoon when the situation exploded. A group of local business owners, led by the owner of a high-end boutique, approached their booth. The woman, impeccably dressed and wearing a scowl, pointed an accusing finger at Sarah. "You," she spat, her voice carrying across the square. "You're the one who's been bringing all these vagrants into our town. You're ruining everything we've worked for." Sarah felt her face flush, a mixture of anger and embarrassment washing over her. She opened her mouth to respond, but James stepped in, his calm voice a stark contrast to the woman's shrill accusations. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Our work is about helping people in need, not about—" But the woman cut him off. "Don't patronize me. We've all seen it. The increase in panhandling, the loitering, it's because of your little project. You're turning Millbrook into a haven for the homeless." The commotion had drawn a crowd. Sarah could see faces she recognized. Customers from the diner, parents of kids she'd gone to school with, even Joe, watching from the sidelines with a worried expression. As the woman continued her tirade, more voices joined in. Suddenly, it wasn't just about the nonprofit anymore. Years of unspoken prejudices and fears came pouring out. Comments about property values, safety concerns, and the character of the town flew back and forth. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah locked eyes with James. In that moment, she saw something in his expression change. The calm, academic demeanor he usually maintained gave way to a fierce determination. Taking a deep breath, James climbed onto a nearby bench. His voice, strong and clear, cut through the noise of the crowd. "People of Millbrook," he began, "I came to your town as an outsider, a researcher looking to understand the dynamics of small-town America. What I found here was both beautiful and troubling." The square fell silent as James spoke, his words weaving a powerful narrative of community, compassion, and the true meaning of neighborliness. He challenged the crowd to look beyond their fears, to see the humanity in those they had long ignored. As James's impromptu speech reached its crescendo, Sarah felt a shift in the energy of the crowd. Faces that had been twisted with anger moments before now showed signs of reflection, even shame. But just as it seemed the tide was turning, a shout rang out from the back of the crowd. "He's one of them. He's not even from here." In that moment, as accusations flew and the crowd's mood threatened to turn ugly once more, Sarah knew she had to make a choice. The next few minutes would determine not just the fate of their nonprofit, but the soul of Millbrook itself. With her heart pounding, Sarah stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. Sarah's mind raced as she stepped onto the bench beside James, her eyes scanning the sea of familiar faces turned hostile. This was her moment, she realized, to bridge the divide that had been widening in Millbrook since she started her initiative. "Friends, neighbors," she began, her voice shaky at first but gaining strength with each word. "I've lived in Millbrook my entire life. I've served many of you coffee at Joe's, watched your kids grow up, celebrated your joys, and mourned your losses. This town, this community, is my home." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "But being part of a community means more than just living in the same place. It means looking out for each other, all of us, even those we don't always see or understand." As Sarah spoke, she could see the tension in some faces begin to soften. She pressed on, her voice filled with passion and sincerity. "What we're trying to do with our nonprofit isn't about changing Millbrook's character. It's about embracing the best parts of who we already are. A town that cares, that comes together in times of need. We're not bringing problems to Millbrook. We're addressing issues that have always been here, just beneath the surface." She gestured to James, who stood quietly beside her. And yes, James came here as an outsider. But isn't that the story of Millbrook? A place where strangers can become neighbors, where we judge people not by where they're from, but by what they contribute to our community. As Sarah continued, she began to address the specific concerns that had been raised. She talked about the programs they had implemented to help the homeless find jobs, about the decrease in petty crime since they started providing meals and resources. She shared stories of lives changed, of families reunited, of hope restored. "This isn't just about helping the homeless," Sarah said, her voice cracking with emotion. "It's about making Millbrook stronger, more compassionate, more united. It's about living up to the ideals that our town was founded on." As she spoke, Sarah could see the crowd's mood shifting. Angry faces began to soften. Whispers of agreement rippled through the gathering. Even the boutique owner who had started the confrontation looked conflicted, her earlier certainty wavering. But Sarah knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. As she finished speaking, she made a bold proposal. "I understand that many of you have concerns, so let's address them together. I propose we form a community task force with representatives from all sides of this issue. Let's work together to find solutions that benefit everyone in Millbrook." The suggestion hung in the air for a moment, met with murmurs of consideration. Then, from the back of the crowd, a voice spoke up. It was Joe, his gruff tone carrying across the square. "I'll be on that task force," he said firmly. "Sarah's got a good heart, and she's onto something important here, but I reckon we all need to have a say in how it's done." Joe's endorsement seemed to break the tension. Slowly, other voices joined in, volunteering for the task force, or expressing cautious support for the idea. As the crowd began to disperse, their angry energy dissipated into small groups of discussion. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had taken a stand, not just for her nonprofit, but for her vision of what Millbrook could be. James helped her down from the bench, his eyes shining with pride and something deeper that Sarah wasn't quite ready to name. "That was incredible," he said softly. "You've given them a way forward, a chance to be part of the solution." But even as Sarah basked in the momentary victory, she knew that the real work was just beginning. The task force would need to be organized, meetings held, compromises reached. The path ahead was far from clear, but for the first time since she'd started this journey, Sarah felt like she had the whole community behind her. As the sun began to set on Founders Day, casting long shadows across the town square, Sarah, James, and their supporters began the process of cleaning up their booth. The events of the day had been exhausting, but there was a new energy in the air, a sense of possibility that hadn't been there before. Sarah knew that this conflict resolution attempt was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more minds to change, more bridges to build. But as she looked around at the faces of her neighbors, some newly supportive, others still skeptical but willing to engage, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The confrontation that had threatened to tear Millbrook apart had instead opened a door to dialogue and understanding. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a start. And for Sarah, who had begun this journey with a simple act of kindness to a stranger, it was proof that change was possible. One conversation, one mind, one heart at a time. As she and James walked home in the fading light, discussing plans for the task force and the work ahead, Sarah realized that the true resolution of this conflict would be an ongoing process. It would require patience, perseverance, and a willingness to listen and adapt. But for the first time, she truly believed that Millbrook was up to the challenge. In the weeks following the Founders' Day confrontation, Millbrook experienced a subtle but significant shift. The community task force, born out of conflict, became a catalyst for change that no one had anticipated. Sarah found herself at the center of this transformation, facilitating meetings that brought together diverse voices from across the town. Business owners sat alongside social workers, longtime residents engaged with newcomers, and slowly, a new vision for Millbrook began to emerge. The turning point came during the third task force meeting. As the group grappled with the challenge of addressing homelessness without disrupting the town's economy, an unexpected voice spoke up. It was the boutique owner who had initially confronted Sarah at the Founders' Day celebration. "What if," she said hesitantly, "we looked at this as an opportunity rather than a problem? What if we could create a program that not only helps the homeless, but also benefits our businesses?" Her suggestion sparked a flurry of ideas. A local contractor proposed a job training program in construction and home repair. The owner of a small tech startup offered to teach basic computer skills. Even Joe, in his gruff way, suggested that the diner could expand its menu to include dishes prepared by people going through the program, showcasing their skills and stories. As the ideas flowed, Sarah watched in amazement. The very people who had once resisted her efforts were now actively contributing to the solution. It was a turning point, not just for the nonprofit, but for the entire community. James, who had been quietly observing, leaned in to whisper to Sarah, "This is it. This is how real change happens." In that moment, Sarah realized that their initiative was evolving into something much bigger than she had originally envisioned. It wasn't just about providing meals or temporary shelter anymore. It was about creating a model for how a small town could address complex social issues by tapping into its own resources and creativity. The new direction crystallized over the next few meetings. The task force proposed the creation of a comprehensive program called Millbrook Rising, which would integrate job training, education, and community integration for those experiencing homelessness. Local businesses would play a crucial role, offering internships and job placements. The town council, seeing the broad support, agreed to provide some funding and resources. For Sarah, this turning point brought both excitement and challenge. The scope of their work had expanded dramatically, requiring new skills and knowledge. She found herself diving into grant writing, program development, and community organizing with a fervor she hadn't known she possessed. As the plans for Millbrook Rising took shape, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into a movement that was reshaping the very fabric of her hometown. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Sarah felt that they were truly on the brink of creating lasting change. With this new direction, Sarah, James, and the entire Millbrook community were stepping into uncharted territory. The challenges ahead were daunting, but the sense of unity and purpose that had emerged from the conflict gave them hope. Millbrook was no longer just addressing a problem, it was pioneering a new approach that could serve as a model for small towns across the country. As the Millbrook Rising program began to take shape, Sarah found herself in a moment of quiet reflection. Sitting on the porch of her family's small house, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues, she marveled at how much had changed, not just in her town, but within herself. The Sarah of a year ago would hardly recognize the woman she had become. Once a shy waitress who rarely spoke up, she was now leading community meetings, negotiating with local officials, and inspiring others to action. The transformation went beyond just confidence. It was a fundamental shift in how she saw herself and her place in the world. "Penny, for your thoughts?" James's voice interrupted her reverie. He had become a constant presence in her life, a partner in their shared mission and a friend who challenged her to grow. Sarah smiled, gesturing for him to join her on the porch swing. "I was just thinking about how different everything is now, how different I am." James nodded, understanding in his eyes. Growth isn't always comfortable, but it's always valuable. You've come a long way, Sarah. As they sat in companionable silence, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. She thought about the homeless man she had first encountered outside Joe's diner, who turned out to be James in disguise, and how that simple act of kindness had set off a chain reaction she could never have anticipated. You know, she said slowly, I used to think that making a difference meant doing something big, something world-changing. But now I realize it's the small things, the everyday choices, that really matter. James nodded, his expression thoughtful. That's a powerful realization. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the world's problems, to think that one person can't make a difference, but you've proven that's not true. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had indeed proven that one person could spark change, but she also knew that she hadn't done it alone. The growth of Millbrook Rising was a testament to the power of community, of what could happen when people came together with a common purpose. As she looked out over her hometown, Sarah saw it with new eyes. The streets she had walked all her life now held new meaning. That corner was where they had held their first community outreach event. The old warehouse on Elm Street was being renovated into a job training center. Even Joe's Diner had been transformed, now serving as a gathering place for task force meetings and a training ground for aspiring chefs in the program. But perhaps the most significant change was in the people themselves. Sarah saw a new spirit of engagement and compassion in her neighbors. People who had once turned a blind eye to the town's problems were now actively working on solutions. The us versus them mentality that had threatened to tear Millbrook apart was slowly being replaced by a sense of shared purpose. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Sarah turned to James. We've still got a long way to go, don't we? He smiled, his eyes reflecting the determination she felt. We do. But look how far we've already come, and we're not alone in this anymore. Sarah nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose wash over her. The journey ahead would be challenging, but she was ready for it. She had grown in ways she never thought possible, and she knew that growth would continue as long as she remained open to it. As they sat there, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the darkening sky, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude for James, for her community, and for the unexpected path that had led her to discover her true calling. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the first anniversary of Millbrook Rising approached, the town buzzed with excitement. The main street was adorned with banners celebrating the program's success stories. Homeless individuals who had found stable jobs, families reunited, and a community transformed. Sarah stood in front of Joe's Diner, now expanded to include a training kitchen for the program's culinary arts initiative. She watched as people from all walks of life, business owners, former skeptics, program participants, mingled and chatted, united in their commitment to the town's new direction. James appeared at her side, a proud smile on his face. You did it, Sarah. You changed Millbrook. She shook her head, smiling back at him. We did it. All of us, together. As they joined the celebration, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What had started as a simple act of kindness had blossomed into a movement that had reshaped the very fabric of their community. It wasn't just about addressing homelessness anymore. It was about rediscovering the power of compassion, the strength of unity, and the potential for change that exists in every individual and every town. The story of Millbrook Rising had spread beyond their small town, inspiring other communities to launch similar initiatives. Sarah had become a sought-after speaker, sharing their experiences and encouraging others to find their own paths to positive change. As she looked around at the faces of her neighbors, old and new, rich and poor, all now part of a shared vision, Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey wasn't over. There would always be new challenges to face, new minds to open, new lives to touch. But Millbrook had proven that with compassion, perseverance, and a willingness to see the humanity in everyone, even the most entrenched problems could be addressed. In the end, the true transformation wasn't just in the programs or policies, but in the hearts and minds of the people. And that, Sarah knew, was the most powerful change of all.